The event marked a new bold step by student activists who have been waging a campaign against Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. Among other things, the students demand an abrocation of the lèse majesty law, a reduction in subsidies for the royal family, an end to glorification of the royal institution, and termination of the Privy Council, the body of advisors to His Majesty the King. The manifesto, which was later referred to as a dream, has triggered a heated debate in the Thai society, which still holds the royal institution in high regard. It has also drawn a strong backlash from royalist groups who are calling for counter rallies. Panusaya, a leader of the so-called United Front of Thammasat and demonstration, said, since MPs have begun talking about amending the constitution, the group wants them to consider its 10-point demand. The group has been a main driving force behind a series of anti-government protests over the past several weeks.
Panusaya, a 21-year-old sociology student of Thammasat University, has been at the forefront of the student-led protests. She has been under the spotlight since the night she read out the 10-point manifesto at the Thammasat rally. Better known as Rung among friends, she began her political activism in early June when she joined a student-led protest over the disappearance of Wanchalerm Sat Saksit, a Thai activist abducted in broad daylight in Phnom Penh. In a recent interview, the outspoken student leader admitted that the demand might have offended many people, but insisted that the students' aim was to help make things better for the society. At one point, she said she knew she was running a risk of going to jail or even getting killed. But she said, I don't think this is the time to be afraid anymore. Among those most sympathetic to the students are MPs of the Kao Klai or Move Forward Party, the reincarnation of the now defunct Future Forward Party of Thanathorn Jungruengkit. The party has made it clear that they are pushing for a constitutional amendment that will also leave the door open for possible changes on the chapter related to the monarchy.
And yesterday, Chairman of the House Committee, Padipat Santip Pada, said the committee invited student representatives to air their views on the current political situation and on the issue of constitutional amendments, as well as education reforms. He urged the public to be open-minded with ideas and demands made by students. And during a session with the House Committee, student representatives urged authorities to provide safe space for them to express their political views and to ensure that they would not be intimidated or harassed.
And that is the student activist that everyone is talking about right now. But as we're all aware that there will be a new series of protests that will be coming up very soon, the main question is right now, why the students are actually coming out to protest against the government. One of the student activists shared their personal views on Thai politics and the current situation at a seminar which is called Thailand's Youth Movement and Political Directions in Search of a Common Future. The co-founder of Free Gender Thailand and Free People Thailand, who is also a third-year student from Chulalongkorn University, expressed that the Prime Minister tried to compromise with the demonstrators, but she believes that he should respond more to the demands rather than just listening to them. Although she cannot see the future for Thailand, due to the current political system, she still has a few expectations of the country's progress.
For me now, I cannot see Thailand's future like exactly because it have the trap called constitution. We cannot choose the prime minister by our voice because we got the Senate from this constitution. In 3 years, I hope to see that we have justified constitutional that the people can vote for the prime minister themselves. Student who was oppressed by the authoritarian have the right to vote. In 10 years, if I am teacher, I can teach my student what is this, what is the democracy, what is a dictator. So I think my student will lead the movement if we have to do the movement next.
Similarly, the co-founder of Triam Protest Against Dictatorship, Triam Udom Siksa School, explained the reason why young students are protesting, stating that their generation grew up with 2 coups d'etats with many political turmoils in between. She also believes that the authoritative system in Thailand forced them to think a certain way about politics, which contradicts with reality.
Now, during those times, many of us were too young to comprehend what had been going on. And meanwhile, our parents and the school were forced feeding us this kind of black and white narrative of what was happening. But now I think the turning point for many of us was the access to the internet. You see, with that access, we could get to new sets of information, the kind that contradicts what we had lived with our whole life. It contradicts the reality that we lived with and that were taught to us at home and at school. Because the conservative family values and the authoritarian culture in schools, which have been oppressing us for so long, were the direct results of the authoritarian regime and the fact that the conservative has so long been in power. And it's like we finally saw the big picture. And we understood why we were feeling so frustrated with what we were living with.
At the same time, the member of the Freedom Kasetsai group, who's also the security management for flash mobs of the university, discussed how safety protocols were in place for protesters, key speakers, and the organizers of the protest. He believes that if we can control our power, we can control our protests. And in cases where government agencies try to harass the demonstrators, negotiation would be the key.
As you've seen, when we meet some accident, as you know, when government agent try to harassment, the first one we have to be the negotiation to deal with them. If you see when they try to take your picture, you have to take him back, and you can check him. Where you from? Where you work for? You can know because this is a rule. It's a rule under the law. You seen when you seen his card, and you ask for the reason why he want to take a picture, he want to harass.
They were quite eloquent, and what they say should help answer the question whether or not these young students know what they are doing, right?
Yes, because we're seeing that they have their own opinions and many things have told them. So, for example, like what they said, the oppression and the authoritative atmosphere, the system here has made them think a certain way, but because of the internet and all these new technologies, it helps them learn the bigger picture of the whole situation here. So we cannot say anymore that the students are being blindfolded, but they actually have their own ideas and their own perspectives of how Thailand should move forward.
Absolutely. Now let's get back to the issue of the constitutional amendment. It's quite obvious that the Move Forward Party, the reincarnation of the now defunct Future Forward Party, is ready to go its own way in pushing its own version of the constitutional amendment. And that means it is willing to launch a campaign on its own to gather enough signatures from members of the public to get a process of amending the constitution started. The party, which has wide support among young people, wants to do a way to get it all together with the current Senate, which is seen as the biggest impediment to democratic development. And it is convinced that it can only be done with a totally new constitution. But the party faces the challenge of convincing other political parties to go along with the idea, not to mention the Senate, which holds the key to any attempts to amend the current constitution. Even Pheu Thai, the biggest opposition party, is already distancing itself from Kao Klai's radical stand. And a small war of words has even erupted between members of the two parties over the issue. Both parties want a new constitution to be drafted with full public participation, but they have different ideas about its contents. Kao Klai party has only 54 MPs in the House of Representatives, hardly enough to push through any legislation. Besides, any constitutional amendment needs the support of at least 1/3 of the senators, which is something most unlikely to come by, given the Senate's close affiliation with Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and the military. Thirachai Pantumat, an MP of Kao Klai party, suggested yesterday that his party is left with no choice but to enlist public support for a constitutional amendment. And under the current constitution, at least 50,000 people can sign a petition to demand a constitutional amendment. Sometimes we need forces outside the parliament to push for changes, said Thirachai. He did not say when he expected the signature campaign to start. In fact, iLaw, a Thai human rights NGO, has already started a signature campaign for the same purpose. It wants to see a new constitution that requires a prime minister to be an elected MP, senators to come from direct elections, and a new selection process for independent organizations that will provide political and legislative checks and balances. It also wants a new constitution to be drafted with full public participation through a constitution drafting assembly representing people from all walks of life.
And we're still on the Kao Klai party. The three-finger salute, which was borrowed from the famous Hunger Games movie series, has already become a symbol of defiance for protesters seeking an ouster from Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. And today it was the very first time that the salute sign was raised in the House chamber. Yantida Bangpyeon, an MP of the opposition Kao Klai or Move Forward Party, flashed the three-finger salute while discussing alleged police harassment of students and political activists. An MP representing Chanthaburi province, Yantida cited an incident on the 21st of August at Si Anuson School in the eastern province, in which plainclothes police and a school teacher accosted some students who had raised the three-finger salute. They took pictures of the students and demanded to know their names. She claimed that police later called the students' parents, and after classes, the students were told by their teachers not to return to school. The Kao Klai MP claimed that a few days later, the same police officers phoned some student activists asking whether they had plans to rally against Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha when he visited the province on the 25th of August.
No, and there have been complaints from students at many schools that they were intimidated after they spoke out against the government during rallies on their campuses. And toward the end of her remarks yesterday, Yantida flashed the three-finger salute while saying that she wanted to bring the incidents to the attention of the Prime Minister and the ministry in charge of education so that there will not be any more intimidation of people who express their political views. So this three-finger salute sign has become a symbol of defiance now.
And it's not only in the protests anymore, it's now in the parliament as well.
Okay.
And moving on, another big story for today. We all might remember one of the most high-profile robberies earlier this year, where a school director committed a crime at a gold shop in Lopburi province. What's even more shocking is that there is also a murder of 3 innocent people, and as a result, the death sentence has already been ordered. A school director who killed 3 people, including a young boy, a young boy, while stealing about 665,000 baht worth of gold ornaments from a shop in Thailand's central province of robbery back in January, was sentenced to death by the criminal court on Wednesday. According to the public prosecutor, the defendant, Prasithichai Kao Klai, widely known as Golf, who was the director of a primary school in Singburi province, robbed the gold shop located in the Robinson shopping mall on the 9th of January this year. During the robbery, he used his semi-automatic pistol equipped with a silencer to kill a security guard and a shop employee. A stray bullet also killed a young boy. In sentencing the defendant to death, the court refuted his claim that the robbery was not premeditated and was due to his debt problems. The court decided that the robbery had been planned in advance, citing the fact that his pistol was equipped with a silencer. The court also dismissed the defendant's claim that the death of the boy was accidental, noting that the same bullet that killed the security guard also killed the boy. The defendant's appeal for leniency, citing his previous good character, was also rejected by the court on the grounds that he did not give up voluntarily, but was captured by the police while attempting to evade arrest, and that his confession was not helpful at all. So that is the latest on one of the biggest high-profile robberies in Thailand for this year.
All right. And so we have been keeping a close watch on the ongoing National Convention of the Republican Party in the U.S. And today, they nominated Mike Pence as a candidate for vice president. Right?
Yes, and that is definitely the highlight of the third night of the Republican conventions. So today, Mike Pence has already accepted the nomination for his second term as the vice president. And for the past few nights, we've been hearing speeches from the members of the Republican Party as well as the Trump family. And right now we have Kun Ratapon Onsanit, Chief of VOA Thai, to tell us more about the story.
So the RNC has started with events and speakers in a mix of in-person and virtual formats. President Trump has promised surprise every night, the same as the DNC, which ended last Thursday. The RNC is a political infomercial, and its TV event is a format that President Trump is supposed to be familiar with. The surprises so far perhaps can be seen in special activities that we don't usually see on TV as part of political spectacles. On Tuesday night, Donald Trump presided over a ceremony welcoming 5 foreigners, including individuals from countries like Bolivia and India, becoming American citizens. Another unusual sight was a gathering of dozens of people who listened in person to First Lady Melania Trump speaking at Rose Garden at the White House. The DNC last week opted against that kind of gathering out of concerns over COVID-19. In addition to the President and the First Lady, the RNC has lined up members of the Trump family. Donald Trump Jr. spoke on the first day, praising the president for creating prolonged economic growth and attacking China for causing the COVID pandemic. Other children of the president, Tiffany and Eric, also took to the stage. And Ivanka Trump is slated for Thursday, and her role is to introduce Donald Trump before he speaks. By the way, her role wouldn't be dissimilar to that of Biden's children, who introduced former president last Thursday as well. I want to also say that the support from the Trump family at the RNC came after the news on taped remarks by Donald Trump's sister, Marianne, who said that the president doesn't have principle. In terms of tactics, we have seen similarities and differences between the RNC and DNC. While the Democrats paint a gloomy picture if Trump wins the election, the GOP also paints a picture of the country drifting toward the left and radicalization if Biden wins the election. The terms of radical left were mentioned several times at the RNC so far and raised questions of Biden's political stance. And unlike the DNC that booked VIP speakers like 3 former presidents, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, as well as high-profile GOP disaffected like General Colin Powell, the RNC invited politicians and ordinary people who emphasize the Donald Trump brand of GOP, which is contrary to the establishment. Those speakers include Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina, and he's the only black Republican in the Senate. Also, Tim Scott defended Donald Trump and dispelled criticism of Donald Trump as a racist. Another speaker was Jason Joyce. He's a lobster man from Maine. He said that 4 years ago he didn't support Donald Trump, but he changed his mind this year because he believed that Donald Trump is a solid conservative, and also he thinks that Donald Trump's trade policy would be beneficial to American businesses. I think in the days to come we will hear the messages about Trump's ability to lead the U.S. economy. This is one of the few areas that Donald Trump holds the lead over Joe Biden in polls, and the word jobs would likely be mentioned a lot to energize his base. As far as the enthusiasm is concerned, TV viewership number is out. Nelson said that there are 17 people tuned to the RNC on the first night compared to 19.7 million who watched the DNC on the first night. But if the last election any indication, I would say that the survey numbers and the poll stats can give a very different picture from the final result of the election. And that is perhaps why the GOP is confident that they have more paths to victory than their opposition.
And that was Kun Rattapon from VOA Thailand and his reading of the ongoing Republican National Convention, which has been running for 3 nights now. So tomorrow night is the highlight. President Trump will be speaking in his acceptance speech, and sure you can expect bombshells.
Definitely.
From him.
And just so you know, these are the stories we've also been following.
Thailand recorded 1 new case of COVID-19 today, who returned from India and is now under state quarantine. The total number of infections is now 3,404, with no new recoveries nor fatalities. Pattaya police are investigating the apparent suicide of a Thai man in Pattaya who was in state quarantine after returning from abroad. The man arrived from Israel on Tuesday and entered quarantine at Jom Tien Palm Beach Pattaya Hotel, joining 167 other returnees. At about 4 p.m. yesterday, he is reported to have jumped to his death. The Thai Labor Ministry reports that a Thai worker in hospital in Saudi Arabia has died from COVID-19. The Thai worker was treated for COVID-19 at a government hospital since the 6th of August. The Labor Office said that the victim's employer is working out outstanding pay and other financial benefits due, which will be sent to his family in Thailand. The victim's body will be buried in Saudi Arabia in accordance with the measures announced by the Saudi Ministry of Public Health.
The rest of the world, Thailand included, of course, are being caught in an escalating conflict between the US and China. And the big question is how countries like Thailand should deal with the fallout from the conflicts. Tonight we have Dr. Piti Srisangnam, Director of Academic Affairs of the ASEAN Studies Center, Chulalongkorn University, with us to try to answer some of the questions about the ongoing conflicts in many areas between the two giants, right? So China has suddenly become a big issue in this year's presidential election, and both parties are playing the China card to their, believing that will be played in their advantage. Do you think at the end of the day it will make a difference for either of the candidates? We have the Trump and we have Joe Biden. No?
I think there's no difference in terms of direction because right now it's more like a common consensus between the two parties. Both Democrat Party and Republican parties already agree, maybe by accident, that they agree that China is the common strategic rival to the U.S., especially the expansions of the influence of China in terms of economics. But the difference between the two parties is that how to tackle with the Chinese problems. That's really the difference.
So they have to prove who is tougher than the other in dealing with China, right? Then that's the key.
I think for Republican, it's going to be like more focused on short-term policy, focus on the thing that attack China suddenly, such as trade war. It will be stronger in terms of like protectionism, xenophobia, as well as radicalism policy. If Trump win the presidential again, but if Joe Biden win this election, it will come back to the scenario when Bill Clinton rules, when Obama rules, right? At that time, U.S. will try to initiate another regional trading arrangements. And this regional trading arrangement will decide to block China out of the pictures by setting a new rules and regulations in terms of trades and investment.
But all along, Trump has been trying to portray Joe Biden and the Democrats of being weak on China, and himself alone is tough on China. So you think this message will sell well with the constituents?
I think it sells well for the people who have a short eyesight, right? But people who have a longer visions, they know that China and U.S. is, they have too much trade and investment. They are too much engaging between each other, right? The volume of trade, the value of investment between China and U.S. is too high. Hence, if you try to do the policy like the way Trump did for the past 4 years, that's not only hurts China, but also hurt U.S. trader and investment as well.
So between if President Trump wins again or Joe Biden wins the election, which one will deteriorate the relations between U.S. and China a lot more, in your perspective?
In my perspective, I think China is more like a, longer visions. They see things in a very, very long term. Hence, they don't prefer the way Trump attacked them. Because this is more like a suddenly shock, right? Hence, but of course, China, especially this Communist Party, they rule the country since 1949. Hence, they adapt a lot, they know a lot, and they pass all the worst and best situations for a very, very long time. And especially right now, China have their own technologies. They have their own innovations, not only in terms of economics, but in terms of military as well as political as well. Hence, they know how to adapt this kind of their homemade technologies in order to, for example, even right now, some of the Chinese producers still cannot access to like Google resources, but they know how to make it work, right? This is the very good example of how China can adapt the whole situation to benefit itself.
Of course, it's quite clear that the U.S. perceives China as a threat. But how does China perceive the U.S.?
I think China never see U.S. as the rival, but China try to, okay, if you don't intervene our domestic affairs, if you don't destroy our longer plan, that's fine. We can share our future together, which is the thing that Xi Jinping keep calling, right? This is the share community, share future, share destiny. This is the thing that Chinese Communist Party try very hard to articulate for the past, 5-6 years.
So is there a possibility that the U.S.-China relations can improve no matter whether Trump or Biden wins the election?
I don't think it's going to improve, right?
All
but
right.
it will be more like a, on one side, U.S. still try to contain China, and China try to get out of this containment by Belt and Road initiatives, where U.S. try to contain it by Indo-Pacific strategies. But on the other side, they also need to engage to each other to rebuild the global value chain, right? Because every country benefits from these global value chains. Hence, it will be more complex relations between the two countries. They hate each other very much, but at the same time, they also have to make friends between each other.
Because sometimes they still have to rely on each other, right?
Correct, correct. For example, during COVID-19, China sent so many medical supplies to help US from oxygen tank, the respiratory help thing to
But
PPE.
Trump never mentioned about that.
Trump never mentioned about it, right? But I think, but China mentioned about it.
Yes.
That's fine.
That's good enough.
Okay.
Now, recently, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, made a very strong statement
Correct.
about China, right? He described China, specifically the Communist Party of China, as a new tyranny.
New tyranny.
And he urged the free world to unite against this new tyranny. So does it mean that sooner or later, Thailand will be under pressure to join that kind of a united efforts to counter China?
Currently, my team and me study one research paper for TPSO, Trade Policy and Strategy Office, Ministry of Commerce. The topic is Thailand in the New World Order. And from these studies, we see that right now in Southeast, especially in Southeast Asia, there's the vacuum in terms of power. Because right now, US is, decline in the US global dominance. But at the same time, China is not ready yet to replace the leading role. Hence, there's the vacuum in terms of power, right? Because in Southeast Asia, we follow the old world order designed by unipolarity power like US since 1990s. Now it's about to change. But China is not yet ready to set up the rules. Hence, these two parties will try very hard to bring us, Thailand and ASEAN, into their partners. Hence, if we well place our positions, we can benefit from this situation.
When you say well placed, what do you mean by that? How should we place ourselves in this very complex world?
I think right now, for Thailand, especially for Thailand first, we need to play a leading role in ASEAN communities. Because Thailand with ASEAN community, we can position ourselves as the middle power. Hence, in terms of bargaining power, we can get something. And of course, in terms of international relations, there are so many directions, there are so many perspectives. Hence, on one direction, on one perspective, we can make friends with US. And on other side, on other issues, we can also make friends with India, with China, with ASEAN, with Japan, with Korea. Hence, we have to position ourselves as the country that seek no enmities, right? We make friends with everybody, right? Where we position ourselves as a place where everybody would like to do trade and investment in our regions. And at the same time, we have to strengthening our strategic partnership with other regional agreements in order to balancing the strategic powers. In this case, I think between US, China, and India.
No, in fact, historically speaking, Thailand has been very good at that, playing the balancing act, right? And we should continue to do
We
that.
we should. And this is not just by accident. We have a real intentions in order to do this thing. Because, in the real world, we have to separate between any issues, right? You cannot just put all issues together and mess everything up, right? You have to see the good example of the case of Vietnam. Vietnam and China is the claimant states, especially in the South China Sea, right? They have a territorial dispute. But at the same time, Vietnam is the largest investment destinations from China compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. Vietnam have the most highest trade values between China and ASEAN. Hence, that means they know how to separate between territorial dispute, trade, and investment. This is a very, very good example.
So what would be the challenge for ASEAN now with the balancing the powers with the US and China in this time where the elections are coming up?
I think for ASEAN itself, Right now, the most challenge is how to realize the so-called collective leadership among the 10 ASEAN countries. Because from our research project, we still forecast that by the next 1 to 2 years, this is short term, and 3 to 5 years, this is the medium terms. ASEAN still based on our ideologies of non-interference to the neighborhood domestic affairs. We will put everything on vote consensus. But how to move this mechanism to create the so-called collective leadership? Collective leadership is more like an, orchestral music orchestra. There are so many parts: woodwind, percussion, brass, for example, right? Each musical instrument have their own musical notes. They play differently, but at some point, this is trumpet part. So trumpet stand up and start to solo. ASEAN need to position something like that. If Thailand is the champion, for example, in terms of connectivity. Hence, when something happens to ASEAN related to physical connectivities, Thailand take the lead roles, and 10 countries share responsible for what Thailand make decisions. This is the thing that ASEAN move and try very hard to make it happen. And we decided in, Vision ASEAN 2040, the next vision that will come after 2025.
And you believe that Thailand can play a leading role in make this orchestra work, right?
Even the Vision 2040 itself is the project by Thailand. Thailand commissioned area, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, to do this research since the year 2017 in order to prepare ourselves to be, you remember, last year we host ASEAN Summit.
That's right.
And right now we already distribute this draft of Vision 2040 to 10 ASEAN leaders.
We're coming back to China's role on the world stage. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, accused China of doing everything it can by hook or by crook to replace the U.S. as the superpower. Right? But China said, no, we never have any intention to replace the U.S. as superpower. So whom should we believe?
We should believe in ourselves, right? Because I think right now, the propaganda style, like the thing that happened during Cold War, it start to happen again. For example, in Cold War, 1960s, 1970s, most of the people think this is the conflict between socialist communists against free world. And this word was, reused again by Mike Pompeo. But actually, Cold War is not the conflict between socialist communists and free world. Because the term free world is more like a, propaganda thing. Because actually, sometimes U.S. takes side with military dictator.
That's right.
Hence, it's not a real free world, right? But it just,
and Thailand was part of the camp, the free world camp.
That's the way they're trying to find their partner in this vacuum position, in this vacuum stage. Hence, one of my colleagues in this research project, Dr. Am Tang Nirandon, he believed that ASEAN have good wisdom enough in order to learn from the past that once, 70 years ago, 50 years ago, we hate each other very much because of this kind of propaganda. So we better not repeat that history again. ASEAN should be stronger than the past. And actually, 53 years ago when ASEAN was established, it also was established because of this reason, right?
That's right. And China also has a very interesting question for the U.S. The Chinese ambassador to the U.S. recently asked a very, very challenging question. He asked whether the U.S. is ready or will be willing to live with China, which is modernized, strong, and prosperous. So, do you think that China can live with that?
China can live with that. But the problem is, will U.S. live with that, right? I think for the U.S., it's very, very hard to avoid the situation so-called Thucydides trap, right? When the new superpower nation state try to stay at the same level or even higher, the old superpower cannot allow that to happen. And we always see the clash between the old power and the new power.
So how do you see the possibility of a serious crash? Maybe to the extent of an armed crash between these two superpowers?
I don't think the hard war can't happen anymore. Even, during 1970s, 1980s, when there's the disruptive technologies, at that time we call the third industrial revolutions. At that time, Japan seems to be able to become a next superpower stage. Hence, there's the conflict between US and Japan, especially during late 1970s to the early 1980s. But we don't see World War III, right? We see only trade war between US and Japan. And it's ended by Plaza Accord 1985, when Japan was forced to revalue its Japanese yen and change their positions. Hence, I think if there must be a war between China and US, it will not be a hard war, but it will be this kind of thing. And people call it maybe Cold War 2.0, but this Cold War 2.0 will not see a proxy war like Korean War or Iraq-Iran war anymore. It will be in the form of, for example, technology war, virus war, trade war, right? Hence, this is the thing that already happens already, right?
So with the trade war, what is your prospect on this issue? Will this actually improve, or is it going to get even worse from now on?
For the trade war, right?
Yes.
It depends on who will be the next US president. If Trump continue to be the next US president, the trade war will be worsened. But if Joe Biden win the election, I think the trade war will be stay in this position for a while to allow Joe Biden to reform domestic structure back in their home USA first. And then when they start to renegotiate, for example, US come back to CPTPP, US come back to TTIPs, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, at that time, the trade war will be better. Because, like I told you earlier, the two countries engage too much to each other in terms of trade and investment.
So who would be a better leader then between President Trump and Biden for the current situation with the trade war, as well as the relationship with ASEAN countries? Who would be a better leader?
Better for whom?
Actually, when we talk about New World Order, there's more than the aspects of the conflict between China and US. We also think about, for example, international trade, sustainable development, global warming. And if you see this kind of perspective, think out of the framework, just the war between China and the US, Joe Biden seems to be a better choice. At least, I believe Joe Biden will bring US back to Paris environmental agreement, right? And that will make world better in terms of sustainable, in terms of pollutions, in terms of global warming.
So that does mean that countries like Thailand and ASEAN would be more comfortable with Joe Biden as a new president?
I'm not quite sure because, every time when we have an argument related to regional trading arrangement, regional to FTA issues, it's always come because of the rules and regulations initiated by Democrat parties, right? We hate Thai-US FTA, we hate Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's from Bill Clinton, that's from Barack Obama, right? Hence, but this time, we cannot avoid, we cannot drop ourselves out of this kind of negotiations anymore, right? We need a more comprehensive, a higher standard trade and investment agreement in order to create our advantages in this global value chain. But we still cannot imagine yet what kind of agreement, what kind of trade measures they are going to propose in this kind of, maybe next generations of trading arrangements.
But does your team of researchers have an answer yet as to who will win the election?
For our team, we think Biden. But for Thailand, our research team think in the very, very short run, we set the target with one word: survival. Survival first. And then for the middle term, 3 to 5 years, we think about sustainable. Because right now, Thailand is at a very, very high risk. We are at the upper middle income countries. But with trade war, with COVID-19, with disruptive technologies, we have a very, very high chance in terms of like reverse development to the lower middle income countries. Hence, we better survive at this stage first and then going on with a more sustainable thing in the middle term.
So survival and then sustainable goals then.
Correct.
Alright, so if your projection, your team's projection is correct, then we should be prepared for many reversals of things.
Correct. And in our team, we also talk about, original sin as well. Because before we clash with the new world order, we need to know our current positions. And with our current positions comes the original sin as well.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Piti, for your perspectives. And we'll be back with you again in about 20 minutes' time in our Thai language service. All right. So that's all for Thai Business tonight. Kun Donina, myself, and Dr. Piti would like to say goodbye and thank you for watching. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.